Some 200 years ago, a ship sailed out from Massachusetts and made its way nearly to the mouth of the Mississippi River. But sadly, the wind and the waters dragged it to the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. For years, that's where it lay, more or less forgotten about. That's until modern-day marine archaeologists decided to take a closer look. While the wreck itself is fascinating, it was the identity and fate of the men on board that really captured everyone's attention. Experts examining a shipwreck spot details that blow the history books wide open. But before we get started, if you're enjoying this video, show us some love by subscribing. It's the best way to support us and never miss out. Let's get started. It's 1815, and the boat known as Industry is heading out interestingly. All that reached a conclusion on May 26, 1836, which was the day it vanished. And for quite a while, it seemed as though nobody could at any point see it once more. Then destiny mediated, looking like an organization filtering the seabed for a second firm with an oil rent covering that segment of the bay. However, it would be one more 10 years before the Public Maritime and Climatic Organization, NOAA, at long last investigated itself while dragging some new hardware through some serious hardship. That boat sank in 1545 and wasn't found until 1971. Wartime will engender variety wrecks, with the miserable destiny of the regular citizen liner Lusitania having an especially significant effect during the Second Great War. The America has its reasonable part of wrecks. Yet few out of every odd boat has a name that reverberations all over the planet. The business sank off the Bay Coast, yet the way in which well do you know the accounts of the El Nuevo Constant in 1766, the El Catheter in 1784. The SS New York in 1846 are the SF Robert D. Lye and U-166. The El Nuevo Constant and El Catheter were both Spanish. The first was a dealer transport, and the second a brig stacked with silver. The SS New York was likewise loaded down with treasure and the casualty of a storm. The greater part of these boats met their watery destiny because of terrible climate. Yet there are likewise in excess of a couple of Association and Confederate boats lying close to the sites of nationwide conflict fights. Every one is a window into an alternate time span, and nobody cherishes a wreck very like a marine excavator. Fires, awful climate, and the more extraordinary dangers of treachery, robbery, or for sure a blast of dried peas are dangers. However, Herman Melville did a great deal of examination into the universe of whaling that incorporates the innate gamble of somewhat little and delicate people chasing after Goliath, at times worthless creatures. To be sure, the nominal animal might have been motivated by a genuine, legendarily forceful whale called Macho Dick. People have presumably been hunting whales since before records started. In the meantime, the Inuit clans of North America have probably the most well-established whale hunting rehearses, one which they have supported into the current day, and the grim, unwelcoming lands around the cold whales can give everything from food and fuel to devices produced using bone. Since it truly started off in the 1700 years, mass whale hunting hasn't involved endurance or means. Rather, it was about benefit and about man's longing to flaunt his capacity to overcome such enormous and perilous animals. Europeans and Americans both needed to partake in the whaling activity, with the Dutch, English, and the Norwegians generally taking up the training with energy. Afterward, the Russians would turn out to be with the present restricted business chases revolved around Norway, Iceland, and Japan. In the meantime, a few native networks actually practice conventional resource whaling, so there's an undeniable issue with whaling on an escalated scale. In bygone times, more unobtrusive boats would ship off from the greater whaler, each with a group of someplace in the scope of 5 and 7 men. They would have to throw lances by hand to stick the 50-foot sperm whales. Eventually, people would comprehend that whaling was reliably pushing the species towards obliteration, while vegetable oil and gas lights disposed of the necessity for fat as fuel. Yet again, by the 20th years, whaling was failing to exist, but more great guns and greater floating taking care of stations enabled extended viability. Whale oil became sharp, and it wasn't long after the 1980s that a real and general boycott was settled upon. Notwithstanding, the business had been cruising during whaling except brightness days. While the majority of whaling activity happened in the greater Atlantic, Pacific, and cold oceans, there was at this point a tremendous level of activity in the Cove of Mexico, where this boat completed its fort. Truly, according to a 2022 article in the Washington Post paper of the surveyed 250,000 sperm whales killed by American mariners in the 18th and 19th, many years, maybe 1,200 kicked the bucket in the Cove of Mexico. The business was only 64 feet in length, with the size and shape that we'd expect from boats of the time. There was a ton of block to line to endeavor work extraordinary radiators where fat could be taken care of. It was moreover seen as a messed up vessel considering the shortfall of copper sheathing on the opening. Roughly 15 men raw the business, and they worked for a boat engineer by the name of Polk Youth. 3D shape was biracial, being both dim and nearby American. So a truly spellbinding person through his own effort. The essential excursion of the business had went with the bearings. You will not return to Westport without a full cargo of oil or until your plans are utilized, wishing you a satisfying and prosperous excursion. Around 230 barrels of whale oil had been assembled on this outing alone. Far evidently, the sole time ever a whaling transport had absorbed the narrows of Mexico. The accompanying thing anyone saw of the vessel, it wasn't even the business any longer. Furthermore, Energy Undertaking had been surrendered an oil lease for that piece of the cove, and a topographical data associated for the review had identified the boat. Otto was intrigued about the principal report on the disclosure of 15,563 because of the notification of a whaler's warmer. Recall, the same mourners had any time absorbed the inlet of Mexico. The NOAA conveyed a boat called the Aquino's Explorer, but the genuine assessment of the war zone would be finished from a decent ways. Dr. Delgado, his fellow chase specialist Michael Brennan, and a Bone Ocean life researcher by the name of Scott Source, it watched their screens in interest as a remotely worked vehicle was moved around the war zone. It didn't take long to sort out that indeed this was a whaling transport with an unmistakable heater. Other than the overall area of the disaster area, all she knew was that the business skipper was called Saul. Yet Borzilleri in the end found notice of Saul concerning another whaler. The Elizabeth figured out how to uncover an article from the Nantucket Enquirer and Mirror paper from 1836 that depicted the Elizabeth getting back to Westport on June 17. In addition to the fact that it accompanied a noteworthy take of 375 barrels of whale oil, yet it had likewise gotten a few additional travelers, Commander Saul and his men. By some unusual karma, the Elizabeth had been close to enough to the business when it foundered to save its steam. You may be breathing a murmur of help for those 15 valiant men, yet it's a considerably greater arrangement than you could suspect. Envision assuming the boat had gone down, however its team had cleaned up in Louisiana or Mississippi. As Dr. Delgado clarified for the New York Times paper, assuming that the dark crew members had attempted to go shorewards, they would have been imprisoned under neighborhood regulations. That is surely one justification behind whaling boats to stay away from the Bay of Mexico. The second the team set foot in a southern state, they'd have been lawbreakers under nearby regulations known as Sailor Acts as a result of their skin tone. One was that the Elizabeth was nearby. However, one more was that the boat didn't go down upon the arrival of the Tempest. That was the last excursion of the business after its team had deserted transport. As a matter of fact, one more whaler in the space figured out how to come by sufficiently lengthy to guarantee the leftover whale oil in addition to one anchor for itself. Its last resting spot would be close to Pascagoula, Mississippi. We don't have a full manifest of the business team, notwithstanding realizing the chief's name was Saul. Others on board included Q's own child, William, who was a pilot and Shake child and regulation part and cook. In any case, these sorts of different groups by and large were normal for the time. We simply don't have the best records of them, meaning once in a while it's not difficult to forget precisely the way that critical dark and local American commitments have been all through American history. Furthermore, it appears it wasn't exactly who was ready that was outstanding. However, what they addressed, both previously and today, one of Bloch's relatives incidentally turns out to be the leader of the New Bedford authentic culture. The NOAA put out an announcement from Ware Graves, U.S. Delegate Secretary of Trade, saying dark and local American history is American history, and this basic revelation fills in as a significant sign of the tremendous agreement people dark and local Americans have made to our nation. Graves proceeded, "This 19th century whaling boat will assist us with finding out about the existences of the dark and local American sailors and their networks, as well as the monstrous difficulties they looked ashore and adrift. Furthermore, that past might assist us in the present with what another adorable relative, Carl J. In any case, it's not about those large, great assertions. How about we return to Dr. Delgado and his perception that set of experiences is in enormous names? There's such a lot we can gain from little corners of history, like the cruising and sinking of the business, yet we can't simply proceed to look around in the disaster area ourselves. Thanks for watching. If you don't want to miss out on any of our upcoming videos, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. It's the best way to stay in the loop.